Mira had always been drawn to old places. She liked buildings that carried marks of age because they felt honest. Nothing inside them tried to hide its story. Every wall showed years of weather and every corner held a memory. When she learned about an abandoned stone mansion from the 1970s, she felt an instant pull toward it. The town people spoke about it in quiet tones, as if they respected the house or feared it. It had been empty for decades but still stood tall on a lonely hill covered with thick trees. The price was low, almost too low for such a large place, but she felt curious instead of worried. She believed she could give the mansion a new life. The day Myra arrived to see it for the first time, the sky was clear but the air near the mansion felt different. It was colder, as if the house carried its own climate. The mansion was built of heavy gray stones that looked stronger than ordinary bricks. Moss covered parts of the walls, climbing toward the windows. Vines wrapped around the sides like old scars. The roof was made of dark tiles that had survived storms and winds. As she walked toward the entrance, she noticed a stillness around the house that did not match the soft breeze flowing through the town below. The wooden front door was tall and shaped with careful detail. Even though it had aged, it felt firm. When she pushed it open, strong hinges moved with a slow groan. Dust floated in the air and the scent of old wood filled her breath. The mansion held a silence that felt thick, like the silence inside a closed library where every sound mattered. Myra stepped inside and let the door close behind her. The entrance hall stretched wider than she expected. A grand staircase stood in the middle, carved with iron railings that curved in graceful shapes. The wooden steps were worn by old footsteps that no longer existed. A large chandelier hung above, covered in dust. It was once bright, maybe even the pride of the mansion, but now it waited in silence. Light from Myra's phone created faint reflections on the iron designs and made shadows dance on the ceiling. She moved from room to room with growing interest. The living room had wide windows that looked out toward the trees. Dust coated the glass, but she could still see the outline of the forest outside. The walls were painted in faded colors that suggested someone once cared about the appearance of the house. A fireplace sat empty with ashes that looked many years old. She wondered about the last person who had stood there and warmed their hands before leaving the mansion behind. The kitchen held metal counters, ceramic tiles, and wooden cabinets that had grown dry with age. A few broken plates remained scattered near the sink. A chair lay on its side as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. Yet nothing inside the kitchen gave her a feeling of danger. It only felt forgotten. Mira walked deeper into the mansion, exploring long hallways that stretched like tunnels. Each hallway had several doors. Some doors were open and revealed bedrooms with old beds, small tables, and windows covered with curtains that had lost their color. Other doors were closed but opened easily when she turned their handles. She felt like the house had been waiting for someone to return. Everything changed when she reached a door at the end of one hallway on the second floor. This door looked different from all the others. It was made of darker wood that had not faded. The handle felt colder than the rest she had touched. She tried turning it, but it did not move. It was locked. The house had been abandoned for a long time. Yet someone had locked this room with purpose. The real estate agent had mentioned nothing about a locked room. Myra bent down to look at the bottom of the door, but there was no gap to see through that would reach the floor fully, sealing the room completely. She placed her ear lightly against the door, although she expected to hear nothing. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she thought she heard the faintest brush of sound, almost like something moving gently across the floor. She stepped back quickly and looked around. There was no one near her. She told herself it must have been the house settling under her steps. She continued exploring, but the locked door stayed in her thoughts. She tried to distract herself by cleaning small patches of dust and opening windows to let air flow in. But every time she walked past the second-floor hallway, her eyes returned to that door. She decided she would search for a key later. The mansion was old and full of hidden drawers, so she believed she would find something that matched the lock before leaving the mansion for the day. Mira walked outside to take a final look from the hill. The trees around the house moved gently in the wind. From below, the mansion looked peaceful, almost beautiful. The stone walls reflected the light of the lowering sun, giving them a warm tone. She began to feel a deep connection to the place, as if she had taken on a responsibility larger than simple renovation. But when she looked up toward the second floor, her eyes caught something strange. One window near the locked room had curtains that looked newer than the others. Most curtains in the mansion were thin and faded, but these seemed clean and unchanged. They looked recently placed, even though the house had been empty for decades. She narrowed her eyes and wondered if perhaps someone had entered the mansion before it was sold. Or maybe someone had lived here without people knowing. She stayed still for a long moment. The wind moved the branches of trees, but the curtains did not sway. They remained firm, like they were held in place from the inside. Myra felt a small chill that did not come from the evening breeze. She had no answer for it, so she stepped away from the view and prepared to leave. As she closed the front door behind her, a soft sound echoed through the hallway inside. It was faint, almost like an object shifting lightly on a wooden surface. She stood outside, staring at the door, wondering if she had imagined the noise. The mansion had been silent for years. It did not make sense for it to react to her leaving. She walked to her car with her heart beating faster than before. She told herself there must be natural reasons for everything she heard. Old houses released trapped air. Wooden floors changed shape with temperature. Curtains might have been replaced by someone long ago. She tried to give herself simple answers because she did not want to believe the house held secrets. Still, as she drove away, she looked at the mansion through her mirror. The locked room stayed in her mind like a quiet question waiting to be solved. She felt certain she would return soon. She wanted to explore every inch of the mansion and uncover its history. Yet there was one thing she could not shake off. When she had stood near the locked room, she felt a presence. Not a person, not a threat, but a quiet awareness, as if the room knew she was there and waited for her to come back. The mansion had been abandoned for years, but something inside was not ready to rest. Myra woke up early the next morning with the image of the locked door still in her mind. She had dreamed about the hallway many times during the night. In one dream, she was standing in front of the dark wooden door, and the door seemed to breathe like a living thing. When she opened her eyes, the dream faded, but the feeling stayed. She felt a pull, as if the mansion wanted her attention. She decided she would return right away and start cleaning the rooms. Maybe once she became busy with work, the strange thoughts would settle. She reached the mansion before the sun had fully risen. The morning light touched the edges of the hill and made the stone walls glow faintly. The air felt cool and still. She unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and felt the quiet weight of the house settle around her again. It was not a heavy or dark feeling, only a sense of someone waiting. She tried to ignore it and carried her cleaning supplies to the study room on the ground floor. The study room had a large wooden desk with drawers that had not been opened for many years. Myra began by cleaning the shelves and brushing away thick dust. As she worked, she kept thinking about the locked door upstairs. She wondered why only that room had been sealed when the rest of the mansion had been left open to time. She decided to search the desk more carefully. She opened each drawer, one after another. Most were filled with old papers, dried pens, and empty envelopes. In the last drawer, she found a small wooden box. It had delicate carvings on the lid that looked like vines twisting into circles. She lifted the box gently and placed it on the desk. Inside the box were several old keys of different shapes. She had seen this box the day before, but she had not tested the keys then. Now she felt a stronger reason to try again. She placed the keys in her pocket, locked the study room behind her, and walked up the staircase toward the second floor. The hallway felt colder than the rest of the mansion. Her steps echoed softly across the wooden floor. She stopped in front of the locked door and took a slow breath. The air felt still, as if the house itself was waiting to see what she would do next. She chose the first key from her pocket and tried it. It did not fit. She tried the second, then the third. None of them moved the lock. The fourth key was unusual. It had a long stem and a round top with a pattern carved into it. Myra slipped it into the lock and felt a slight give. The key turned halfway, then stopped. It was close to working, but not quite right. She pulled it out and stared at it. The pattern on the top reminded her of something she had seen earlier in the mansion, but she could not remember where. She placed her hand on the door again. The wood felt warm this time, not cold. She pulled her hand back quickly, surprised. She checked the other doors nearby, but they felt normal. She did not know what to make of it, so she stepped away from the locked room and decided to continue cleaning other parts of the mansion. She spent the next few hours clearing out dust, opening windows, and removing old sheets that covered furniture. As she worked, she began to feel more connected to the house. She noticed details she had missed before. A small photograph on a shelf showed a family standing in front of the mansion many years ago. A child held a toy, a woman smiled gently, and a man stood behind them with a proud look. Myra wondered what had happened to that family and why they had left so suddenly. In a lower cabinet, she found a stack of magazines from the 1970s. They showed images of fashion, home design, and local events. One magazine had a short article about the mansion, praising the craftsmanship and the unique stone structure. There was no mention of the locked room. Myra felt a mix of curiosity and confusion. The house had been important enough to appear in magazines, yet no one spoke about the sealed door. When the afternoon sun began to fall, she took a short break and sat near a window that looked out toward the forest. The trees moved gently in the wind. Birds flew through the branches with soft chirps. For a moment it felt peaceful, but then she noticed something strange. From where she sat, she could see the upper floor window near the locked room. The curtains looked the same as yesterday, clean and newer than the others. She watched closely and felt a faint sense of unease. The curtain on the left moved slightly even though the window was closed. The movement was small but clear, as if someone inside had brushed past it. Myra stood up slowly. She looked around the room, trying to decide if she should go upstairs again. Her instincts told her to stay calm and check things carefully instead of rushing. She walked back to the staircase, climbed to the second floor, and stood in the hallway. The air was still. She looked toward the locked door. Nothing seemed out of place. She stepped closer and placed her ear near the door again. This time she heard nothing, only silence. She went to the window beside the locked room and checked the curtains from inside the hallway. They looked old, unlike the ones she had seen from outside. This confused her even more. How could the same window show two different sets of curtains depending on where she stood? She pulled the hallway curtain aside and looked through the glass. If she could see the outside trees clearly, but she could not see the curtains she had noticed from outside. She felt a slow shiver rise in her back. She stepped away and whispered to herself that she must have been mistaken. Maybe the lighting from outside made the curtains appear different. Maybe her angle had changed. She tried to reason with her thoughts, but her heart was beating faster. Determined to understand the house better, Myra walked to the basement. The stairs leading down were narrow and smelled of old stone. She held her phone light in front of her and moved slowly. The basement was larger than she expected. Old crates lined the walls. Bundles of paintbrushes, rusted tools, and dusty blankets filled the corners. A long table stood near the center with sheets of paper that had curled from age. One crate in the back was different from the rest. It was smaller and made of dark wood with metal edges. It looked newer than the other crates, but still old enough to belong to the time the mansion was built. Myra knelt beside it and brushed away dust. There was a small metal plate attached to the top with a symbol that matched the pattern. On the fourth key she had tried earlier, her heart jumped when she saw it. She lifted the crate lid slowly. Inside was a single envelope tied with a thin ribbon. She picked it up. It was light and thin, as if it held only paper. She opened the envelope and found a handwritten note. The ink had faded, but the words were clear enough. It said something simple but unsettling: "Do not open the room until you understand why it was closed." Myra stared at the message for a long time. The handwriting was neat and gentle. It did not feel like a warning meant to scare. It felt like advice from someone who cared about whoever found it. She touched the symbol at the bottom of the note and felt a deep sense of mystery settle around her. She placed the note back into the envelope and stood up slowly. The mansion did not feel threatening, only watchful. But the locked room was no ordinary space. It was part of a story she did not yet know. A story someone had tried to hide or protect. As she walked back upstairs, she felt the weight of the key in her pocket. She knew she was getting closer to answers, yet she also sensed that the mansion wanted her to move carefully. It was not ready to reveal everything at once. The locked room waited at the end of the hallway, silent as always. But now Myra knew something important. The room had a reason for being sealed, and she was the one who had stepped into its path. Myra woke early again, long before the sun touched the hill or the trees around the mansion. She sat on her bed and held the envelope she had brought home from the basement. The note inside felt heavier than its thin paper should allow. She read the message again and again until the words started to sink deeper into her thoughts. "Do not open the room until you understand why it was closed." The words did not feel like a threat. They felt like a reminder. Someone long ago had wanted to protect something or someone. Myra wondered if she should leave the room alone, yet her interest grew stronger with every passing hour. The locked door was the center of a story she had not yet learned. She left home with a steady breath and drove toward the mansion. The morning sky held a soft pale color and the air was cool. When she reached the hill, she noticed how quiet it felt. Even the usual bird sounds seemed softer than normal. She stepped out of her car, walked up the path, and unlocked the front door. As she entered, the house greeted her with the same gentle stillness that now felt strangely familiar. Myra placed her bag near the staircase and checked the rooms. Once more, every room looked the same as the day before. Dust on the floors, old curtains on the windows, and furniture arranged in careful yet forgotten ways. She moved toward the study and placed the envelope on the desk. She wanted to keep it in a place where she could see it often. The symbol on the note matched the design on the fourth key, and she knew the connection was not an accident. After a moment of thought, she made tea in the kitchen using a small portable stove she had brought earlier. The warm drink gave her comfort and helped her focus. She took a slow sip and walked to the staircase, preparing herself to study the upstairs hallway again. The second floor felt colder than the rest of the mansion, just like before. Her steps made soft echoes that reminded her of empty halls and old museums. She moved slowly toward the locked room, holding the fourth key in her hand. The key felt smooth and slightly warm from her touch. She reached the door and placed her palm flat against it, hoping to sense something again. The wood felt still. No warmth this time, only silence. Myra stepped back and looked around. The hallway seemed normal. Nothing felt strange or threatening. She wondered if her imagination had been affected by the note. Still, the mysteries of the house were real, not imagined. The locked room, the new curtains she saw from the outside, and the voice-like sound she had heard days earlier all pointed toward something hidden. She knew she should not open the door yet, because the note asked her to understand the reason behind it first. So she turned away from the locked room and decided to learn more about the mansion from another direction. She walked to the attic stairs, which she had not explored yet. They were located behind a narrow wooden door near the end of the second floor. When she opened the door, a faint smell of old paper and cloth drifted down. She climbed the attic steps slowly, holding her phone light in front of her. The attic was large and filled with boxes. Some were covered with cloth, while others remained open with items spilling out. Myra walked to the nearest box and lifted the cloth. Inside were children's toys made of wood, a small train, a carved horse, and several blocks with faded letters. They looked like they had belonged to the child in a photograph she had seen earlier. She opened another box and found more family items, old jackets, knitted blankets, and a diary with a leather cover. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the diary gently. The first page had a name written in careful handwriting. It belonged to a woman named Lena. The diary entries were dated from the early 1970s. Myra read slowly, trying to understand the family that once lived in the mansion. Lena wrote about her husband, her little daughter, and the calm life they enjoyed inside the stone walls. She wrote about the forest, the views, and the peaceful feeling the mansion gave her. There was nothing unusual at first. Everything sounded warm and simple. But as Myra turned the pages, she noticed the tone begin to change. Lena wrote about strange sounds at night. She wrote about footsteps in the hallway even when everyone was asleep. She wrote about the locked room, and how she did not understand why her husband refused to let anyone inside. Myra held her breath as she read further. Lena explained that the locked room had belonged to someone from her husband's family, someone who lived in the mansion before it was rebuilt in the 1970s. She said her husband never spoke about that person, and whenever she asked, he became quiet and distant. Lena wrote that she once tried to open the door with a spare key, but her husband stopped her before she could turn the handle. After that day, he kept the only key with him at all times. Myra wondered if the fourth key she found in the study box was the same key Lena mentioned. She read more entries. Lena described moments when the locked door seemed to hold a presence behind it, a soft sound, a hint of movement, or a slight shift in the air. Lena did not believe it was anything dangerous. She wanted to understand it, but her husband always insisted the room must remain sealed. The final entries in the diary became shorter. Lena wrote about her daughter feeling afraid of the hallway. She said the child refused to walk near the door alone. Then one day the family left the mansion, and there were no more entries after that. Myra closed the diary slowly. She felt a calm sadness for Lena, who had lived in the mansion without answers. She placed the diary gently back into the box and looked around the attic again. Every item here held traces of the family's life, but the locked room downstairs was the center of everything. She climbed down the attic stairs with a heavier heart. She walked through the hallway once more and stopped in front of the locked door. She felt no warmth or sound this time, but she sensed that the house wanted her to learn more. Myra went downstairs to the basement again. She walked to the crate where she had found the envelope. She examined the metal plate with the symbol. The symbol looked simple at first, but now that she had seen the diary, she wondered if it represented the earlier family member Lena mentioned that as she studied the crate. Her knee touched the floor, and she felt a board shift under her. She lifted her knee and pressed her hand against the floorboard. It moved slightly. She slid her fingers under the edge and lifted it carefully. Beneath the board was a small compartment. Inside it lay a single metal box. It was smaller than the wooden crate and made of dark metal that did not show rust. She lifted it and sat cross-legged on the basement floor. The box had a latch without a lock. Myra opened it slowly. Inside were several folded papers and a photograph. The photograph showed the mansion before it was rebuilt in the 1970s. The original building was smaller but had the same stone walls. In the picture, a young man stood near the entrance with a serious, distant expression. Myra did not know him, but she sensed he was the family member Lena mentioned. She unfolded the first paper. It was a letter written by that same man. He described how he had sealed the room himself and why he believed no one should open it. The letter did not mention danger. Instead, it spoke about regret, memory, and something he wanted to protect from misunderstanding. The letter ended with a line that made Myra pause. I sealed the room because what remains inside is not meant to be feared. It is meant to be respected. Myra closed the box gently and placed it on her lap. She felt a mixture of calm and curiosity. The locked room was not a threat. It was a memory held carefully by generations. She stood up and returned to the hallway near the locked room. The key in her pocket felt warm. She now had pieces of the story. She understood the room held something important, something personal. She was ready to learn more, but the room stayed silent, and the mansion waited for her next step. Myra stood in front of the locked room with the metal box still in her hand. The hallway was quiet, almost too quiet, and the afternoon light filtered through the windows in soft lines. She felt a calm weight settle inside her chest as she thought about everything she had learned. The diary, the letter, the photograph, the strange curtains that changed from inside to outside, and the gentle sounds behind the door. Every clue felt connected, yet the full picture remained hidden. She placed the metal box on a small table near the hallway and took a slow breath. The locked room no longer gave her fear. Instead, it felt like a story waiting for its final page to be read. She touched the door gently, not to open it but to let herself feel grounded. The wood felt steady and smooth, as if it had been cared for long ago. Myra decided she needed to understand the earlier family better before she attempted anything else. She went downstairs to the living room and took out the magazines she had found the day before. She turned through the pages again, looking for any mention of the people who once lived here. Most of the magazines focused on local events, fashion, and home designs. Only one small article talked about the mansion, showing a picture of the stone structure and praising its design. There was no mention of the original family member, nothing about why the mansion had been rebuilt, nothing about the locked room. It was as if the part of the story that mattered most had been kept private and hidden from the public. Myra sat on the old sofa and tried to gather the clues in her mind. Lena had written about her husband guarding the room. The earlier family member had sealed it with clear purpose. The daughter had felt afraid of the hallway. The attic held toys and blankets from a simple family life. The basement held a letter asking for respect, not fear. Nothing pointed toward danger. Everything pointed toward memory and careful protection. She stood up and walked to the kitchen, where she prepared a simple snack from the supplies she had brought. As she ate, she looked out the window toward the forest. The trees swayed lightly in the wind, and the branches created shifting patterns on the ground. The mansion felt alive in a quiet way, as if it breathed with the rhythm of the land. After finishing her meal, Myra returned to the hallway with a metal box. She opened it once more and studied the photograph of the older mansion. The young man in the picture had a thoughtful expression. His posture was straight, but his eyes seemed distant. Myra sensed sadness there, though she could not explain why. She looked at the letter again. The line about respect stayed in her thoughts for a long moment. She set the letter aside and unfolded the next paper in the box. It was a drawing hand-sketched with charcoal. The drawing showed the mansion before its rebuilding. It also showed a small room at the end of a hallway that looked exactly like the locked room. But in the drawing, the door was open. Inside the room was a chair, a tall window, and a small wooden box on a table. The artist had drawn light shining through the window onto the chair. The image felt peaceful, like someone had once spent much time there. Myra wondered if the locked room had belonged to the young man himself or someone close to him. Perhaps it held something personal that he had wanted to preserve. The presence behind the door no longer felt mysterious. It felt like memory held in stillness. She folded the drawing carefully and placed it back into the metal box. Then she took the box with her and walked to the study. She opened the drawers again and searched for anything she might have missed. Inside a narrow compartment, she found a small notebook filled with dates and short notes. It seemed to be a repair log for the mansion. Most entries were simple lines about fixing windows or reinforcing walls. But one entry stood out. It said a portion of the second floor had been rebuilt with stronger stone and thicker doors. Myra felt her heart quicken. It matched the time when the mansion had been restored in the early 1970s. She realized the locked room might not just be old. It might have been sealed more than once. She kept reading the notebook. Another entry mentioned the installation of a new curtain system for one window on the second floor. Myra froze. That must be the window where she had seen the newer curtains from the outside. But why had the curtains changed when viewed from inside? She walked upstairs again and stood under the hallway window near the locked room. She examined the curtain closely. It was an old fabric, worn and faded. There was no sign of newer material. She moved the curtain aside and looked outside. The forest, the hill, and the sky looked normal, but then she noticed something faint on the window frame. A thin line of metal ran along the top edge of the glass. She touched it gently. It felt smooth and cool. The metal was not part of a normal window frame. It looked like someone had placed it there to create a reflection or a filter. She stepped back and realized what it meant. The window had been altered in a way that made the curtains inside appear different from outside. Someone had designed it purposely. Myra felt a mix of amazement and confusion. Why would someone do that? What were they trying to hide or protect? The more she learned, the more she understood that the locked room was tied to someone's life story, not to any threat. She sensed that the earlier family had struggled with something emotional or personal. She wanted to solve the puzzle with patience. Myra decided to spend the rest of the day exploring the basement again. She walked down with the metal box and looked at every crate, every shelf, and every tool. Many items were damaged by time, but some things were well preserved. She found a crate filled with letters, though most were unreadable due to faded ink. However, one envelope was still sealed. She opened it carefully. Inside was a short message written with trembling handwriting. The message explained that after the mansion was rebuilt, one room had been kept untouched because it held something the family could not bear to change. It said the room had been important to someone who had passed away before the restoration. It was not meant to trap anything. It was meant to hold a memory safely. Myra felt a deep calm spread through her. The locked room was not a place of fear. It was a place of remembrance. She walked upstairs slowly, carrying the envelope with her. The hallway was still and quiet. She stood in front of the locked door. This time she did not feel cold or uneasy. She felt a gentle warmth in her chest. She placed the envelope on the floor near the door and sat down for a moment. She closed her eyes and listened. For several long seconds there was silence. Then she heard it again. A soft movement, like a faint brush across a wooden floor. But it did not sound threatening. It sounded gentle, as if something on the other side was acknowledging her presence. She touched the key in her pocket but did not turn it. She knew she was close to understanding the full story, but she wanted to honor the request written in the letters. She needed one last piece of information before she opened the door. She whispered softly to herself that she would find the truth soon. She would learn exactly why the room had been sealed and why it had been preserved with such care. She stood up and walked away from the door with calm steps. The locked room behind her stayed silent again, but Myra felt a quiet awareness from within. She was close to the end of the story. She could sense it. The mansion was waiting for her final question, and when she found the answer, the door would be ready. Myra woke with a steady calm the next morning. Unlike the earlier days when the mansion had filled her thoughts with questions and unease, she now felt close to the truth, close to understanding the meaning behind the sealed room and the memories hidden inside it. The notes, the diary, the photograph, the altered window, and the quiet presence behind the door all pointed toward one answer. She planned to return to the mansion early, not with fear, but with respect. The morning sky carried a soft golden light. A gentle breeze moved through the trees around the hill as she drove toward the stone mansion. The building appeared peaceful, almost welcoming. She stepped out of her car, walked up the path, and pushed the front door open. The familiar stillness wrapped around her. It was no longer an empty silence. It felt like the house had been waiting for her to come back. Myra placed her bag near the staircase and walked first to the study. She picked up the envelope she had found earlier and held it in her hands. Then she walked slowly upstairs to the second floor, to the hallway that had once felt cold but now carried a softer feeling. She stood in front of the locked room with the fourth key resting in her palm. She did not open the door yet. Instead, she sat down on the floor again, leaned against the wall, and closed her eyes. She wanted to make sure she understood everything before she took the final step. She remembered the diary entries written by Lena, describing how her husband protected the room and avoided questions. She remembered the letter written by the earlier family member, saying the room held something that deserved respect. She remembered the sketch of the room showing light coming from a window, and the photograph of the young man who looked thoughtful and distant. She remembered the crate, the papers, and the message that said the room was kept unchanged for someone who had passed away. As she sat quietly, she imagined what the room might contain. She did not think of anything strange or frightening. She imagined something simple, perhaps something dear to the earlier family, a memory, a story, or a legacy. She whispered to herself that she was ready. She stood up slowly, turned to face the door, and placed the key into the lock. The key slid in smoothly, as if the door recognized it. The lock turned with a soft click. Myra felt her breath pause for a moment. She waited. Nothing happened. The house stayed quiet. She placed her hand gently on the handle and pushed the door open. The hinges did not creak. The door opened with quiet grace. Inside the room, soft light filled the air. The curtains on the window were the newer ones she had seen from outside. They looked clean, untouched by age. The window glass reflected a warm glow, even though the hallway had been dim. Myra stepped into the room slowly, letting the light guide her final steps. The room was small but filled with a gentle stillness. A wooden chair sat near the window with a cushion that looked carefully placed. A table stood beside it with a small wooden box resting on top. The air felt warm, almost comforting. It felt nothing like the rest of the mansion. It felt preserved. Myra walked to the wooden box and opened it carefully. Inside were several items that were simple yet meaningful. A small carved toy, a silver pendant, and a folded letter with neat handwriting. She picked up the letter and opened it gently. The letter was written by the young man from the photograph. It explained the full story of the room. It said the room had belonged to someone he loved deeply, someone who spent many hours sitting by the window watching the changing seasons. The room had been filled with light because that person loved the warm glow of the morning sun. When that person passed away, the young man sealed the room to keep it exactly as it had been. He did not want time to change it. He wanted the light in the room to remain untouched. He wrote that the window had been altered later so that from outside it would reflect the curtains that person used to love. The work had been done out of care, not secrecy. He asked anyone who opened the room in the future to treat it with respect and kindness, just as he had hoped to do. Myra felt her eyes soften as she read the final lines. They said that the room held no danger and no darkness. It held only love and memory, preserved in stillness. The earlier family had rebuilt the mansion around the sealed room, keeping it as a silent tribute to the person who once filled it with quiet joy. Myra folded the letter gently and placed it back into the box. She looked around the room. Nothing felt mysterious now. Everything made sense. The presence she had felt earlier was not something strange. It was the sense of someone's memory lingering in the place they loved most. She sat on the chair by the window and looked outside at the forest and the sky. The sunlight touched her face and created a warm feeling. She imagined the earlier family member sitting in the same chair long ago, watching the same trees in the same gentle sunlight. She stayed seated for a while, letting the room speak to her in its soft, quiet way. Then she stood up, touched the wooden box one last time, and walked slowly out of the room. She did not close the door fully. She left it slightly open, not out of disrespect but to let the room breathe again. As she stepped into the hallway, the air felt different. The house seemed lighter, as if it had released a long-held breath. Myra knew she had honored the story that had been protected for so many years. She walked downstairs with a peaceful heart and placed the metal boxed gently on the study desk. She explored the rest of the mansion with new eyes. The rooms no longer felt abandoned, they felt ready for a new life. She imagined painting the walls, restoring the woodwork, cleaning the windows, and gently preserving the locked room as a special part of the house's history. Before leaving for the day, she went back upstairs and stood in front of the open door. She whispered that she would take care of the mansion and keep its story alive. She did not need to know the name of the person who had once lived in the room. The love and respect behind it were clear enough. The mansion felt calm as she walked out the front door. She looked back once more and saw the sunlight touch the upper window. The curtain inside glowed softly with the light, just as it had in the drawing. Mira smiled. She no longer feared the house or its secrets. She now carried its story with her. The stone mansion had waited for someone to understand it, and she had answered that call. As she walked down the hill, she felt certain of one thing: the past was no longer trapped behind a locked door. It had been honored, it had been seen, and now it could rest held gently inside the memory of those who cared.